you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion new single, my hater, the big better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million, the devil, that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the 19th part of What If Deku Finds Ben's Watch Ultimatrix. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Once, not that long ago, Midoriya would have been bouncing off the walls in excitement. He was such a fan of heroes, and being in a room full of some of the best in the entire world was something he had never imagined happening, even in his wildest dreams. He knew all about these 7, or at least what their governments allowed people to know, plus his own estimation of their abilities. Now, instead of devolving into a rabid fanboy, he just calculated how much they would be able to help in a fight against Shigaraki. "So, you're the famous Midoriya," Stars and Stripes said, her hands locked together in front of her. Midoriya met her gaze evenly from the opposite side of the table. In fact, he liked to think that his own stare was more intimidating. "And your Stars and Stripes, I know you trained under All Might for a while. Are we going to have a problem?" Beside him, Melissa looked a little nervous. Stars and Stripes was arguably one of the strongest heroes on the planet, and Midoriya was speaking to her like she was a student a year younger than him. Stripes shrugged. "I know what All Might said about you, but Nezu vouched for you, and I saw you fighting that Shigaraki brat. Considering what Nezu said Shigaraki is going to be capable of, I'm willing to at least give you the chance to prove yourself. That's all I ask." Midoriya turned to the other heroes. "Is that acceptable for you?" Gentleman Jack looked at the others sitting on his side of the table and nodded. "We've made worse deals in the past. You'll get your chance, lad." Panzer abruptly stood up and marched over to Midoriya. He loomed over the boy, but before Melissa could try to pull him back, or Midoriya could transform, the big German swept him up in a back-breaking hug. "Welcome to the team, little one." The tension immediately vanished, and the other heroes groaned. "Panzer, mate, could you be serious for more than 5 bloody minutes?" Ranger asked. At first glance, Ranger looked like a typical park ranger, complete with a stereotypical Australian hat, with half the brim pinned up. The only differences came with the heavy belt loaded with tools and weapons, and his quirk, which not only let him track down anyone he had seen anywhere on the planet, but could see their weaknesses as glowing spots on their bodies. While he wasn't the most lauded of the heroes here, he had been instrumental in taking down criminal organizations worldwide, and had practically erased organized crime in Australia. "You never let me have any fun," Panzer said, and gently lowered Midoriya back into his chair. Monkey King rolled his eyes. "The problem is that you have your fun at the worst time. You really need to read the room. Like you're one to talk." Mr. I pranked the with itching powder in their seats. "You have no proof it was me." Melissa stared at China's top hero with wide eyes. "I saw that on the news. People thought it was a chemical attack." Monkey King shrugged. "It resulted in better security protocols that prevented an actual chemical attack, and nobody got hurt." After exiting the plane, Monkey King had gotten into his costume, a set of dark armor in a style similar to that used by Sun Wukong in the Fables, with his hairy hands, feet and tail exposed. Leaning against his chair was an ornate staff that he could use with not just his hands, but also his feet and tail. His mutation had nothing to do with his quirk, which was called probability. The laws of probability literally bent to give him the best possible odds in whatever he was doing. It also gave him a sort of sixth sense that usually put him wherever he was most needed. That had resulted in a flawless record as a hero, and a permanent ban in all gambling establishments around the world. "I have a question," Geosync said, changing the subject. "How are you all speaking Russian so fluently?" Geosync had also put on her costume, which was really just the outfit she'd been wearing, but now with white tights and a white coat that went down to her ankles. Despite being the top hero in Russia, many people around the world looked at her with the same distrust and disdain that her country had earned for generations, and Geosync had done everything in her considerable power to show that Russia had changed from its pre-quirk days, but it was too early to tell if her efforts had been successful. Still, she was powerful. Her quirk, Singularity, allowed her to control gravity in any way she pleased, as long as she maintained eye contact with her target for more than 3 seconds. She could weigh something down, send it hurtling into space, or even lock it into orbit around an object. She could also use her quirk on herself to fly, or become immovable. The scary part was that she could apply her quirk to as many targets as she wanted, and it only stopped when she wanted it to. "They aren't speaking Russian," Midoriya said, and held up the OMNITRIX. "My watch also acts as a universal translator, so when I saw all of you, I activated a translation field. I've never had to use it before, since usually only one person in a group I've been in spoke a different language." "I want that," Stripes declared. "The last time I tried speaking Italian, I almost caused an international incident." "Well, at least we can all speak in the languages we're most comfortable with," Jack said. "And we really should get back on track before someone derails the conversation again." "Killjoy," Panzer muttered, but sat back down. "Sorry about this," Maccabee said tiredly. "We all have to be these shining examples for our countries, but when we're like this, we tend to goof off a little. It keeps us sane." "It's fine," Midoriya said, though the banter reminded him of the rising stars, and it made his heart ache. "What do we need to do first?" Ranger pulled out a tablet. "I've looked up all of Detnerat's locations. Now that we know it was the front for a quirk supremacist organization, I can see how each of these could be used as bases. They could easily hide all kinds of illegal activity in there." "The closest one to Island is in Mexico City," Maccabee said. "I suggest we hit that one now, before they have a chance to destroy any evidence." "Can you, though?" Melissa asked. "I mean, don't you need permission from the Mexican government and your governments?" Stripes grinned. "Well, the information about Shigaraki has already been passed on to just about every country that will listen. We're keeping the whole omnipotent thing from the public to prevent a panic, but the top levels of the world know what kind of threat we're dealing with. We might not have permission to do this, but nobody is saying we can't do this." "We'd rather ask for forgiveness than permission," Jack said. "And we had best get going. Even with our jet, it will take us several hours to get to Mexico." What should I do?" Melissa asked. Panzer shrugged. "You're Melissa Shield. Your father might be in jail, but his assets are still valid. Island's laboratories and workshops are at your disposal." "I don't get possession of those until I'm 18, Melissa protested. "That's next month." "Considering what's at stake, I don't think anyone will mind," Monkey King said. "Forgiveness instead of permission, remember?" Melissa considered that and nodded. "Okay, I'll get to work on anything we might need." "Don't hold back," Midoriya told her. "Think of the kind of crazy things May would build, and do that." "Minus the explosions?" Melissa asked innocently. Midoriya couldn't help but laugh. "If at all possible." Stripes clapped him on the shoulder. "Time to see if you really live up to the hype, kid." Midoriya nodded. "I'm ready." The flight to Mexico didn't take nearly as long as the older heroes expected, thanks to Deku. He turned into Upgrade, an amorphous alien covered in what looked like green circuitry, and merged with the jet, and quickly turned it into the fastest thing to fly on the planet. "Where are we going to land?" Deku asked as he turned back to normal. His arm and eyes ached, but he needed to give the Omnitrix time to recharge. "Nowhere," Stars and Stripes admitted. "We barely had time to talk our way into Mexican airspace, so actually getting permission to land isn't going to happen. Geosync, can you lock the plane up here? We'll have to airdrop onto the target." "No problem," Geosync said brightly. "I can also get us back up here when we're done." Stripes towered over the younger woman and patted the white furred hat on her head. "See, this is why you're my favorite Russian." Geosync blinked. "Am I not your only favorite Russian?" "She's American. You're lucky she has even that many favorite Russians," Maccabee said, and pulled up a hologram of the blueprints of the building they were flying over. "We can't expect any of these plans to still be valid. If anything, we should expect hard resistance." "Not on the outside," Ranger corrected. If the intel provided by Nezu is correct, and I'm positive it is, Detnerat used a lot of innocent people as a mask. Still, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a small army hiding out in that building. Panzer chuckled darkly. His right arm clanked as metal emerged from his skin, forming a cannon. It's a good thing the 8 of us are worth an army. Stripes grinned for a moment, and then got serious. Okay, we don't have an accurate floor plan, so we'll go with shock and awe. We drop down, fight our way through anyone who wants to stop us, and go for their server rooms. We should also try to find any physical copies, Deku suggested, and all eyes turned to him. I mean, if I wanted to hide important stuff, I wouldn't want it on a computer, where it could be hacked. Unless it's on a private server that can't be accessed from the outside, Ranger argued, but shrugged. Still, it wouldn't hurt to look, just in case. Panzer elbowed Stripes. Talking like a pro already. Kid's really serious about being a hero, huh? The American raised an eyebrow. We'll find out. She turned to Deku. You don't have a problem with jumping out of a plane, do you? Deku met her gaze evenly. I've done scarier. Something in his eyes told her that he was serious. Geosync easily guided them all to the rooftop without detection, and Deku turned into Ghost Freak to scout out the inside. What he found was such a shock that he almost stopped being invisible before he could make it back outside. Lots of employees in the outer offices, just like we thought, he reported. But the lower levels are filled with Nomu tanks, just like the ones under Jaku Hospital. Maccabee tapped the lower edge of his mask. Were any of them active? Ghost Freak shook his head. No, it looked like they were still, cooking. That's good for us, Stripes said. It means we won't get bogged down fighting a bunch of those monsters. I say we split up into 3 teams. One team focuses on getting the civilians out of the building, another team destroys the monsters, and the third team goes for the intel. Geosync, my dear, I think we should get the civilians out, Jack said. It will take a long time for me to use my quirk on so many people, Geosync said with a frown. Jack chuckled and blinked twice to use his power. As soon as he did, he had copied her quirk, at twice the power and effectiveness. I believe that we will cut that time down significantly. Monkey King closed his eyes and focused. His eyes snapped open, and he turned to Ranger and Maccabee. We should go for the computers. Something tells me we'll be most effective there. Both of the other heroes nodded, while Maccabee made sure the plane would be ready to fly as soon as Geosync let it go. Got it. Stripes cracked her knuckles. That just leaves the rest of us to get rid of the Nomu. Kid, you ready for a fight? Deku's only response was to turn into wrath, and he growled. Oh, I like this kid, Panzer laughed, and readied his cannon arm. I'd say we're done being quiet, yeah? The first sign any of the Detnerat employees had that they were under attack was when the roof suddenly and violently exploded. Before any of them could even scream, 8 heroes dropped into their midst, ready for a fight. Civilians are to come with us, Gentleman Jack shouted. If you offer resistance, we will use force. Some of the employees, the ones that had actually been members of the PLF, tried to fight back, but they were left floating and helpless by both Jack and Geosync before they could do anything. The rest were quick to surrender and followed the heroes outside. Ranger, Maccabee, and Monkey King only stayed long enough to quickly interrogate one of the employees to find out where the server room was, and then hurried to reach it. Wrath led Stripes and Panzer to where he'd found the Nomu tanks. As they got closer, cables running along the walls started to hum ominously. When they reached their objective, the first of the bioengineered creatures were starting to pull themselves out of the pods. I thought you said they weren't awake, Stripes shouted. Wrath didn't try to defend himself. Instead, he just lunged at the nearest Nomu, a spindly creature with tentacles that writhed around its exposed brain. The Nomu raised its arms and fired barbed darts, but Wrath powered through the barrage until he was within reach. He crushed the Namu's brain with a single punch, and then kept going into another. Panzer aimed his cannon at a Nomu and fired. The monster's hide kept it intact, but the blast was still enough to bowl it over. By the time it got up, its head was hacked off by Panzer's other arm, which was now a screaming chainsaw. Stripes moved in a blur, smashing apart a small mob of Nomu in a matter of seconds. Even as Wrath, Deku couldn't help but marvel at how powerful she was. She reminded him of fighting All Might with bakugou. She definitely wasn't as fast or as strong as he was now, but she was certainly beyond almost anyone else. Thinking of All Might soured his already foul mood, and wrath roared as he punted another Nomu through a wall. After stepping around the remains of another Nomu, Panzer turned his chainsaw hand back to normal and held it to his ear. All teams, we've engaged hostile Nomu. I repeat, the Nomu are waking up. What's your status? Geosync and I have cleared the outer levels, Jack reported. Local police are on the way, and I don't think we want to explain ourselves. I suggest we hurry. We've located the servers, Maccabee said, over the sound of fighting in the background. Monkey King is accessing their files now, but we ran into some resistance. Nothing we can't handle, but it might cause us a delay. Over. With Stripes and Wrath still busy with more Nomu, Panzer took command. Jack, Geosync, join up with Maccabee and help them get out of there. That data is what matters. Do you need help with the Nomu? Geosync asked. I think we've got that, Stripes. Look out. The Nomu, a hulking brute that looked like a humanoid rhino, was too close to Stripes for Panzer to use his cannon, and he was too far away to turn into something and intervene. He could only watch as the beast bellowed and charged only for Wrath to put himself between the monster and the American. There was a sickening crunch as a horn on the Nomu's face impaled Wrath through the shoulder, stopping a mere inch from Stripes. Panzer didn't know if Deku powered through the pain, or was too angry to register it, but Wrath locked the Nomu in place with his injured arm, and used the other to reduce the monster's exposed brain into so much soup. With a grunt, Wrath pulled the corpse off of him and turned into Swampfire. Are you okay? Stripes blinked first at the healing Swampfire, and then at the dead Nomu. Yeah, I'm fine. Thanks for the save. No problem. Swampfire double-checked that all of the Nomu were dead, and sighed. I just want one day where nobody gets hurt. None of the good guys. Anyway, Panzer added, he made to slap Swampfire on the back, but stopped when the smell hit him. Okay, I think we should start getting out of here. The police can handle the rest. The sound of helicopters got Swampfire's attention. Assuming they're not here for me. They'd have to get through us, Stripes said, arms crossed. You could have died taking that hit for me, kid. That earned you a little trust today, so we'll see how things go. Deku nodded. I guess we will. We're coming to you live from All Might's most recent press statement. As before, All Might has stressed the importance of unity of purpose against the villains rampaging throughout Japan, despite growing protest. All Might has refused to comment on allegations that he convinced the Prime Minister to sign off on an arrest warrant for one Midoriya Izuku, despite having no evidence that the UA student has committed any crimes. The police have also refused to provide a comment, other than saying that Midoriya's flight from the country is suspicious. Todoroki raised an eyebrow when a splash of acid reduced the TV to a puddle. That seemed extreme. We could have just turned it off. Oh, like anything else is on these days, Ashido growled. All anyone talks about is alien stuff, villains, and how Midori is a criminal because All Might says he is. She huffed and put her head on his shoulder. You'd think they'd have something else to yammer on about, like the weather. Todoroki glanced out the window, where the rain was still coming down. Like that's any better. The rain had started 2 weeks ago, right after what people were calling the disaster at Jakku. All of Japan was being lashed by the storm, and those in the know suspected that Shigaraki was somehow behind it. The handful of people in Japan with rare weather-related quirks had tried to stop the storm, and had all either died or been left comatose for their efforts. All Might had tried to clear away the clouds with a few well-placed punches. It gave the country clear skies for about 20 minutes, and then the clouds rolled back in. After a dozen attempts to cheer people up by giving them clear weather, All Might had given up trying. All Might's recent failures from trying to stop Shigaraki to stopping the storm had only reinforced his dip in popularity. Almost everyone had seen videos of him attacking Midoriya and shouting baseless accusations at him, only to then fail to stop Shigaraki, while Midoriya had fought him to a draw. Plenty of people still believed in All Might, and crowds gathered daily to demand that whoever was harboring Midoriya should send him back to face justice. However, the longer All Might failed to provide evidence that Midoriya was secretly working with Shigaraki and All for One, the more people wondered if there was any truth to the accusations. It also didn't hurt that the best lawyers in the country had been hired to defend Midoriya, even though he wasn't there. Yaoyorozu had been particularly smug when she told her friends that her parents had spared no expense on defending their daughter's best friend. It had been a bit of levity that the rest of the students at UA needed after what people had learned about the true nature of quirks. Many people around the world were coming to terms with learning that the human race had been altered by an alien from another universe. Someone had put the pieces together that Midoriya could turn into the various pure versions of what everyone had received DNA from. It had become something of a game to guess which alien was the source of which quirk. Gyro was convinced that her sound powers had come from Echo's species, and Shoji was positive that he was related to Igai. Some of the others were harder to identify, especially when many of their powers came from the merging of several different aliens. Todoroki sighed and tried to change the subject to something less gloomy. "Did you finish your homework?" Ashido gave him a look. "I copied Momo's work. You really think I care about that right now?" "No, but Izuku will hate himself if he thinks we failed school because we were worried about him." "That's not fair," Ashido said angrily. "It's still true." Todoroki wanted to kick himself for bringing up Midoriya. His absence was still a raw wound for his friends, and using him against those who loved him felt wrong. Ashido leaned into his left side. It was warmer on that side, and the heater in the dorms barely staved off the cold outside. "Whatever, I'm too tired to be mad." Todoroki put his arm around her shoulders. "Did Sky Dancer ever get back to you about patrols?" "No, she hasn't responded to any of my messages." Ashido frowned. "She didn't die during the battle, I checked. I'm worried she just quit." More than a few lower-ranked heroes had retired following the battle at Jakku, but also a few high-profile heroes as well. The most notable of those was Yoroi. He claimed that he was quitting out of some kind of penance, that he didn't deserve to be a hero, but many people thought he was just too afraid to fight anymore. To be fair, plenty of other heroes had quit for the same reason. They couldn't wrap their minds around the sheer devastation caused by a single villain, when most of them had expected to fight simple thugs for most of their careers. The difference between those heroes and Yoroi was that he was in the top 10. The heroes expected to lead the charge in a crisis. If someone like him was going to give up, what could the rest do? To Todoroki's surprise, his father had come up with the answer. After waking up from surgery, he demanded to speak to the press, and simply said that the only thing they could do was fight, because the alternative was to allow the villains to kill them all. In private, Shoto had informed his father about the true identity of Dabai. Endeavor knew his youngest son would never make up something so serious, nor would he make a mistake. The two of them made a promise that they would be the ones to defeat Toya. After his eldest son was no longer a threat, Endeavor swore that he would come clean to the press about everything he had done to his family. Shoto understood why he didn't do it immediately. With everything going on, the last thing anyone needed was a scandal like that, and Endeavor would be needed on the front lines. Endeavor had also recently earned points with Shoto, as well as the Rising Stars, by rallying those people, heroes and civilians alike, to support Midoriya. Time and time again, Endeavor brought up how All Might never had any evidence to support his claims, while pointing out how Midoriya had put his life on the line while battling Shigaraki. The high-end Nomu, and the 8 precepts. Endeavor insisted that people judge Midoriya on what he had done, not on what someone said he'd done. Endeavor's no-nonsense defense of Midoriya had drawn in anyone who didn't have blind faith in All Might. There were still many who believed that Midoriya was guilty, but at least the entire country wasn't against him. Todoroki was about to try changing the subject again, but it was taken out of his hands when he saw Asui coming down the stairs, and Ashido shot to her feet. "How's Ochako doing?" she asked. Asui sighed. "She hasn't cried today, so that's a good sign." "That's 3 days in a row," Todoroki noted. "Does that mean she's getting better?" "For now." Ashido scowled. "She's still on house arrest until tomorrow." "It's such crap. That guy had no right to say that to her." A few days earlier, a student from General Studies had confronted Uraraka, heaping abuse and accusations against her. His tirade had been so intense and hate-filled that even the handful of other students that had been with him had been taken aback. Already beyond upset by Midoriya's departure, Uraraka hadn't handled it well, and proceeded to break the other students' arms. That had made the others attack her, and even though Uraraka knew how to fight, she was outnumbered. She had been helped by bakugou, who had been nearby, and by the time the teachers arrived, only the hero course students were standing, with only a busted lip between them. While the general studies students had been disciplined, it was Uraraka that had thrown the first punch, and was told to stay in the dorm for 5 days. In a show of solidarity, the other hero course students had decided to stay in the dorms with her at every spare moment that they weren't required to go to class. Granted, the school's feeble attempts to re-establish a normal schedule hadn't done much to get people to want to go to class, but Uraraka appreciated not being alone. Todoroki started to relax against his girlfriend, but an alert from his phone got his attention. Despite a whine from Ashido, he shifted away and pulled his phone out of his pocket. The text from his father made him smile, something that was odd enough that he briefly worried he was going insane. "What is it?" Ashido asked. "My father got some news about Izuku," Todoroki whispered, just in case someone was eavesdropping. "He still won't tell me who he and Melissa are working with, but he said that another Detnerat building got raided. This one was in Lithuania." Ashido's eyes went wide. "That's the second one. Is he sure Midori was involved?" Todoroki turned the phone to her, revealing a picture from a security feed that showed Diamond Head carving his way through a steel door. Ashido smiled, even though it hurt knowing that her twin was relying on strangers instead of his friends. "We should show this to Ochako," she said. "It'll cheer her up to know he's still kicking." "Yeah." Todoroki stood up, but paused when what remained of the TV sparked. "And you should ask Momo if she'll make another one of those." Ashido winced. "Oh, right. Whoops." All Might shook off the rain as he walked into his agency. The building was emptier than it had been before he'd retired. Despite his efforts, he had managed to rehire some of his employees, but more than a few had refused to work for him again. He was disappointed, but wrote them off as having been swayed by Midoriya's supporters. As much as he wanted to bring the young man in, Midoriya hadn't done anything against All Might yet, so he was willing to tone down his rhetoric. He still felt obligated to remind the populace that Midoriya was still on the loose, following All for One's will, but he was starting to shift his focus on the threat that was closer to home. Besides, he still took his promise to save everyone with a smile seriously, and if he was seen fighting crime, it helped alleviate the anxiety that was building up in Japan. "You are the biggest idiot I've ever known," Gran Torino said as All Might walked into the office. "So you've said." All Might closed the door behind him and raised an eyebrow. "If you're all going to keep coming in here, I should start charging rent or something." "Don't try to be funny, Toshinori, you're not good at it." Sir Nightai had stopped calling him by his hero name shortly after Midoriya had gone on the run. It felt like his former sidekick no longer thought he was worthy of the name. "Your speech was better this time. You only ranted about Deku for 3 minutes." All Might shrugged and headed for the fridge. "As you've pointed out repeatedly, he is outside of my reach, but all indications are that the League is still somewhere in Japan. I'll focus on them, for now." Gran Torino glared up at him. "And if you finally figure out that the kid is innocent?" There was a crunch as All Might's frustration got the better of him, and he crushed the handle of the refrigerator. He almost snapped at his old mentor, but a part of him that didn't want to sever the ties he'd worked so hard to restore stayed his hand. "If you have hard evidence that he isn't working for All for One, I'll apologize." All Might glanced at them. "Do you have hard evidence?" "None of us have evidence either way, and you know it," Nightai said. "But if you keep allowing your obsession to blind you, more people are going to die." Now All Might flinched. Yua had made it very clear that he was partly to blame for Eraserhead's death, and had severed ties with him. It wasn't just Yua teachers that hated him. Miss Joke had sent him a message with enough vitriol that All Might's legal advisor saw it as a death threat. His mood had been even worse at the time, because he was still convinced that Midoriya had abducted Melissa. Only when Nezu admitted that Melissa had willingly gone with Midoriya had All Might even temporarily ceased his rhetoric, but only because he was too busy being disappointed with his sort of niece. He had even considered that she was an accomplice of All for One, but he had made the mistake of saying as much in front of Tagada. That had earned him a fractured jaw when his successor punched him. Tagada's expression had gone scarily blank, reminiscent of Sir Nightai when he was extremely angry, and had told All Might in no uncertain terms that if he ever accused either Melissa or Midoriya of being villains in his presence again, he would put All Might in the hospital. Tagata had refused to speak with him since. "Is there anything you actually need, or did you just come here to read me the riot act again?" All Might asked. "You missed the weekly briefing," Gran Torino said. "You know, the one you insisted all major hero agencies attend, even virtually? Even I do that, and I hate computers." There was a group of villains raiding a JSDF armory, and time was of the essence. All Might finally opened the fridge and grabbed some juice. He took a moment to enjoy a drink with fully functional organs. "After that, I had to talk down that group of people in Sapporo that were going to jump off a building." "And then you had to rescue a cat out of a tree," Gran Torino interrupted. "We get it, Toshinori, you're busy. Do you want to hear the report, or not?" "I'll take the short version." Nightai adjusted his glasses, and then pulled out his phone to read. "The good news is that the curfew the government implemented has helped reduce the number of victims in villain attacks. Most people don't want to go out in this damn rain anyway," Gran Torino commented. Nightai ignored him. "Crime is still up almost 30%, and civil discontent is at an all-time high. Granted, it has only been a few weeks since Jaku, but the panic has been largely replaced with anger and confusion. The alien situation has caused more than a few existential crises, and people are convinced that the government knew about it, not just the commission." At first, All Might hadn't believed that quirks had come from an alien scientist, but when the leaked documents had been confirmed to be genuine, he accepted it as the truth. Granted, he had been so busy that he hadn't had time to really process this revelation, but his own shock was kept at bay by knowing that it really didn't affect his job. "The worst part is that Japan's relationship with the international community has almost completely fallen apart," Nightai continued. "The HPSC discovered the satellite, hid its true origins, and refused to share the truth with anyone outside of the country. It will be a very long time before we regain our international standing, not that we held much esteem in the first place, since our media was very clear how superior our heroes were to other countries." "Complete bullshit," Gran Torino said bitterly. "I've met plenty of heroes from other countries who are just as good as any of ours." On that, All Might had to agree. In fact, it was something he had advocated for years. He wondered how his peers in the network Nezu had created were doing. He had tried to contact them several times after Jaku, but none of them had responded. He assumed they were busy chasing down villains or maintaining order, just like he was. In summary, the line between order and anarchy is tenuous, but we are still in control, for the moment. Nightai sighed. "Our main problem is that, with so many heroes dead or retired, we don't have the numbers to effectively hunt down the League. Even if we could, they've still got Kurogiri," Gran Torino added. "The best we can manage is a stalemate." "Just focus on finding them," All Might ordered. "I'll take care of the rest. With my power at its peak, I'm fast enough to grab them before Kurogiri can warp them away." "You're assuming that you can defeat Shigaraki now," Nightai said sternly. "As I recall, you couldn't stand against him before, and that was with Deku fighting him as well. Assuming Azimuth's estimations are correct, Shigaraki will be even stronger." All Might reluctantly accepted that, but he was mostly just grateful that Nightai hadn't brought up that he'd been trying to fight Midoriya just as much as Shigaraki. It was a sticking point that even some of his supporters refused to let him forget. "That is exactly why we have to find them as quickly as possible," he said. "The sooner we do, the less likely things are to go beyond the point of no return." Uraraka quietly finished putting on her costume. As her helmet slipped onto her head, it bounced against her lip, and though the cut had healed, it reminded her of the scar she'd earned from that scuffle. The idea of an aspiring hero, especially one who had a helmet in her costume, getting a facial scar in a schoolyard scuffle would have been funny just a few weeks ago. Recovery Girl had offered to remove the scar, but Uraraka had refused. It wasn't disfiguring, and it would help remind her to keep her head every time she looked in the mirror. "Hey, Achako, are you ready?" Ashido asked. "Huh? Oh, yeah." Uraraka gave herself a quick once-over to make sure her equipment was set properly. "Who are we patrolling with today?" Yaoyorozu frowned. "We went over the schedule 3 times this morning. Are you sure you can handle this? If not, I could speak to Nezu-sensei." "It's fine, Momo," Uraraka snapped. Let's just get this done, okay? The other girls in the locker room, the new 2A and 2B alike, shared a worried look. Because of her house arrest, Uraraka hadn't been able to go on patrols after the battle at Jakku, like the rest of them. Between her inexperience with the new schedule and her emotional state, none of them were sure how she would handle it. Our team is going with Lemillion, Yayurazu said, ignoring Uraraka's rudeness. It's you, me, and Hanta, handling outer security for Yua. It's only about a kilometer away from the school. Tagata, along with the rest of the big three, had graduated with their year group to Little Fanfare. The three of them had quickly become fully licensed heroes and had begun the paperwork to start their own agencies. With everything going on, actually getting a building and support personnel was impossible. But if people saw that they were preparing for a future outside of the crisis, then it might give them hope. Uraraka sighed. Okay, that sounds easy. Genesis and Uravity met up with Cellophane near the entrance to the school, and then went to join Lemillion at the gate. All three students were surprised to see their friend glaring at another pro-hero. Hawks tried to look nonchalant, but even from a distance, his slump showed just how exhausted he was. After learning that he'd been spying on Midoriya, the students didn't have it in them to pity him. As far as they were concerned, he deserved whatever happened. Look, kid, I'm not here to start anything, Hawks said. I'm just dropping off some intel to Nezu, and then I'll get out of your hair. Yeah, you do that. Lemillion crossed his arms and glared even harder. If you're not out of here in 5 minutes, I'll drag you out. Hawks looked unimpressed, but he still moved at a brisk pace to deliver whatever information he had. As he passed by the three students, there was a flash of recognition across his face, and he had the good grace to look ashamed, if only for a moment. I hate him, Cellophane muttered. I don't care if he never planned to hurt Izuku. If even half of those leaked documents are true, that guy should be in jail. Genesis put a hand on his shoulder. We all feel the same way, but he's useful. When this is all over, he'll face justice. Good. Cellophane waved at Lemillion. We're ready to go. Lemillion took a few deep breaths and then smiled brightly. Right, we'll just have a few sectors to patrol today, but remember to keep those smiles up. Well, Genesis and I will have to, but you two can hide behind those helmets. Still, if anyone talks to you, keep it positive. We want to assure people that we're doing everything we can to keep them safe. It's about the only thing All Might is doing that I agree with, Uravity muttered as they left the shelter of Yua and into the rain. It wasn't too bad today, barely more than a drizzle, but they all knew that they would be freezing and wet by the time they finished their patrol. Oh, don't get me started on him. Lemillion managed to maintain his smile, despite the venom in his voice. At least Sir and Gran Torino finally talked him out of bad-mouthing Izuku during his weekly speeches. I haven't heard him mentioned in days. It wasn't just Sir Naitai and Gran Torino, Genesis said, with a hint of smugness. My parents' lawyers have been making progress with their case, and the government may have ordered All Might to cease. And this is why we love you, Cellophane teased. You throw money at our problems until they go away. Even Uravity couldn't resist a chuckle at that, and her friends relaxed a little. Even if it was for a moment, she sounded like her old self again. By the way, Lemillion, Cellophane continued, did you figure out that new quirk you got? Uravity blinked. Lemillion had gotten another quirk from One for All. Only when I managed to speak to the echoes of the previous holders, Lemillion said. It's called Danger Sense. It basically does what it says on the box. Oh, and they also said that I should get the last 3 soon enough. Should we be worried that you can talk to dead people in your head? Uravity asked. Only if I start talking out loud, Lemillion said with a wink. Then you have permission to hit me to make me stop. Uravity raised her metal hand. Oh, don't tempt me. Lemillion made a show of hiding behind Genesis, and the 4 of them laughed as they stepped out into the rain. If Hawks thought he could avoid all the hate after he entered Yua, he was badly mistaken. As soon as he walked into Nezu's office, he realized he'd made a tactical error. Not only was Mirko present, but also the Midoriya parents. Inko was so furious that her quirk dragged his entire body forward, and his throat landed in her open hand. Hisashi had so much fire streaming from his mouth that he triggered the smoke alarms in the office, which Nezu quickly dismissed. Easy, ma'am, Mirko said as she carefully pried Inko's hands off Hawk's throat. I'll be the first to say he deserves it, but your son wouldn't want to see you go to prison. Hisashi held back his fire through gritted teeth, and then guided his wife out the door. Hawks watched them warily as they left, and rubbed his throat. Somehow, I expected a lot worse, he admitted. You deserve everything you get, you fucking rat, Mirko snarled, but then paused and looked at Nezu. No offense. Some taken. Nezu shuffled a few papers on his desk. As much as I dislike his actions, he has been helpful since, so I will tolerate his presence in my school. He fixed Hawks with an even stare that scared Hawks far more than the hatred from the Midoriyas. Assuming, of course, that he brought something worthwhile. Hawks allowed himself a tiny smile and handed a flash drive over. I smuggled in a little present from a certain blonde girl who accompanied a mutual associate in exile. It's a design for a new type of scanner to find Kurogiri. According to her, it should help backtrack his portals to him. Nezu plugged the drive into his computer and looked over the blueprints. This could work. I'll have our support course build it immediately. Hatsum-san will be happy to work on a project from her friend. Mirko frowned. How the hell did you manage to get this from out of the country? The benefits of being a spy, I know how to talk to the right people. Hawks looked a little smug. And without the commission holding my leash, I can finally use those skills for the right reasons. Better late than never, Mirko said, but finally relaxed enough to lean against Nezu's desk. She brushed part of her hair back, exposing her eye patch. Recovery Girl had repaired the damage to the rest of her body, but Mirko's eye wasn't salvageable. It was hoped that Eri would be able to heal her, but she was still drained from restoring All Might, and neither Recovery Girl nor Mirko would risk the little girl's health for something Mirko was already adjusting to. Thank you for this, Hawks, Nezu said, already reading through reports from other agents across the country. You can see yourself out. We still have a great deal of work to do. Of course we do. Hawks smiled again, but it was tired and sad. After all, we can't do any less than Midoriya, can we? The music starts, and Deku stares up at the walls of Yua, with the title above the school. All Might stands in front of him and draws back a fist. As he starts to punch, Deku turns around, and All Might turns into Hawks, who reaches for him, but Deku keeps walking. Everything around Deku turns black, and he finds himself standing in front of Stars and Stripes, who gives him a smile. The two of them walk over to the other top heroes in their team, as well as Melissa. The scene changes to the rising stars, climbing over debris. All of them are exhausted, but when they see a green flash of light, they run towards it, only for a shadow to loom over them. They turn, ready for a fight, but the international heroes leap over them to drive the darkness back. Watching his friends from a distance, Deku sits down and holds a hand to his mouth. When he pulls his hand away, there is blood all over it, but he just lets the rain wash it away. He then rises to his feet and starts to run. Everything goes dark, and then the light focuses on Shigaraki, surrounded by the League of Villains. He is sitting on a throne, his eyes and hair like the skin of a celestial sapien. Next to him, All for One reaches out, only for his hand to crumble to dust, while Lady Nagant creates her rifle and takes aim. The scene changes again, showing the rising stars, Endeavor and the international heroes fighting the villains. Triumph and Endeavor shoot flames that are met by Dab Eyes. Uravity and Geosync hurl debris at Slice, who cuts it apart. Cellophane pulls Ranger into the air and kicks at Redistro. Genesis and Panzer unleash a barrage of artillery fire onto Nine, who blocks it with his shields. Monkey King and Alien Queen nimbly dodge around Gigantomasia's attacks. Froppy is held up by Chimera, his claws around her throat, while Gentleman Jack fires a beam of heat from his mouth, and Maccabee hurls Virtus straight at Lady Nagant, while Toga pulls out a knife and leaps at the older hero. As buildings collapse, Lemillion joins Suneater, Spirala, Ground Zero, and All Might and attacks All for One. But as the smoke clears, it shows only Shigaraki, Deku, and Stars and Stripes. Stripes claps Deku on the shoulder and charges, while Deku looks down at the Omnitrix. Behind him, two shadowy figures cross their arms and nod as he holds up the watch. 23 days until the end. I blame you for this, Maccabee said calmly. Panzer gave him a look. How the hell is this my fault? We had a plan to deal with this. It was a good plan, and we went over it 6 times. You decided to throw away that very good plan and now look where we are. Panzer turned to Diamond Head for help, but there was no sympathy to be had. Hey, I came up with the plan that you ignored, and I'm annoyed with you. Oh, fine, be that way. Panzer looked up at the giants looming over them. How long can they keep this up? Until they're unconscious, Diamond had said. I told you already. Ugh, fine. Panzer turned his arms into cannons as a small army charged at them. Let's get this over with. The soldiers attacking them weren't actually alive. They were tiny wooden models, all animated by one of the two villains that had trapped them. Puppet Master's quirk let him bring to life anything small enough to fit in his hand, and had articulated joints. His partner, Game Show, could shrink living things, also small enough to fit in his hand. Together, the two of them had committed crimes across Europe, but shortly before the Battle of Jakku, they had been recruited by the PLF. Their organizational skills had earned them a higher position, eventually having authority over most of the PLF's movements in Europe. Deku and the other international heroes had found and dismantled each PLF base, but even with their logistics cut out from under them, there were still PLF officers that might have useful information on Shigaraki. So far, they hadn't been very lucky in that regard, but they were still hopeful that these last two had something they could use. At least, until Deku, Panzer, and Maccabee had gotten caught. Now, they were trapped in an arena the size of a kitchen table, surrounded by Puppet Master's miniature minions, while the two villains laughed. Diamond Head hurled a crystal javelin into the body of a puppet soldier, but the wooden mannequin was unaffected. In fact, it pulled the diamond out of its chest and held it like a sword. You handed it a weapon? Panzer shouted, even as he blew several more puppets into splinters. Oh, shut up, Diamond Head growled, and turned his arms into blades. A moment later, 4 more puppets were sliced to pieces. Next time we go after guys like this, Maccabee said as he shattered another with a single punch, I say we wait for the others. You read the intel on those too, Panzer replied. They aren't that dangerous, just annoying. Sending everyone is overkill. Hey, I heard that, Puppet Master shouted. I could just pull out a gun and shoot you, you know. Diamond Head sighed, and then ripped the makeshift sword out of the puppet's hands and used it to split it in half. I'll take care of this, just give me a second. There was a flash of light, and then Way Big crashed through the glass roof of the tiny arena, since he was under the effect of Game Show's quirk. He was only the size of an average man, but he still had more than enough strength to knock Game Show out with a single punch. With him unconscious, the heroes returned to their real sizes. Deku quickly turned into 4 arms to keep from accidentally destroying the entire building. Puppet Master looked at the heroes, and then his downed partner, and sighed. Okay, I give up. Maccabee brushed off the tiny puppets that were still clinging to him. Smartest move you've made all day. Puppet Master chuckled and held up his hands in surrender, but 4 arms grabbed him by the top of his head. Tell us everything you know about Shigaraki, he snarled. If you hold anything back, I will crush your skull like a grape. Whoa, easy there, kid, Panzer said, and tried to pull 4 arms back. Burly as the man was, he didn't even make the alien budge. Unlike his German counterpart, Maccabee had strength to spare, and pried 4 arms' fingers off of Puppet Master, who fell to the floor with a pained whimper. Easy, soldier, Maccabee said, his voice understanding, but stern. We'll interrogate him the right way. He paused. You've only got a few minutes of charge left. Go take a break. We'll handle the rest. After a moment, 4 arms nodded. Okay. By the time Stars and Stripes, Gentleman Jack, Ranger, Geosync, and Monkey King arrived, they found Maccabee tying up the defeated villains, and Deku was sitting down on a chair in the corner. Monkey King scoffed. Oh, you guys had all the fun. Why, yeah, Deku muttered through gritted teeth as he fought against the pain. That's one way to put it. Stripes took both villains from Maccabee and hoisted them over her shoulders. How bad? She quietly asked the Israeli hero. Stopped him from committing a murder, but we might not be so lucky next time, Maccabee whispered. We're running out of time and leads, and Deku isn't taking it well. Stripes nodded. All of them knew that their window was shrinking rapidly, but they had years of experience to shore up their nerves, while Deku didn't. Jack and I will stay here and interrogate these punks, she said. Geosync, get everyone else to the plane. Deku, after you're recharged, I want you to go upgrade and get us out of here ASAP. I don't think the Madrid police want us in their airspace any longer than necessary. G got it, Deku stuttered through his tremors, but said nothing else as he was lifted into the air. His pain was so great these days that he'd stopped complaining when Geosync used her quirk to carry him. Stripes and Jack waited until everyone else was gone, and then the former knelt by Puppet Master and gently slapped him. Hey, wake up, dummy. The villain winced and held his hands to his head. Ugh, that little shit, he can't do that to me, I'll sue. Yeah, I don't think the terrorist is going to get much sympathy, Stripes said dryly. Now, you're going to answer my questions. Puppet Master glared up at her. Or what? Behind Stripes, Jack sighed. Oh, lad, you just had to ask her that. Okay, we've got good news, and we've got bad news, Stripes said as she and Jack returned to the plane, which upgrade was already turning towards international airspace. Panzer reached into the fridge and pulled out a few beers. What's the good news? Jack shook his head when Panzer offered him a drink. The good news is that we really have crushed all of the PLF outside of Japan, and those designs Melissa has distributed have kept Kurogiri from using those blasted portals of his. He can only use them when he has direct line of sight. Panzer raised a bottle in a toast. If that girl doesn't get the Nobel Prize for her spatial disruptors, I will be very disappointed. Ranger accepted one of the beers. And what's the bad news? Stripes sighed. We are officially out of leads. If there was any useful information on Shigaraki outside of Japan, we would have found it by now. There are no other options, Geosync said, and glanced at the plane's controls, where Upgrade had first merged with the machine. Has Japan's government changed its position? Not in the last week since someone asked, Melissa said through the radio. Izuku patched me in, by the way. And thanks, Panzer, I'd love a Nobel Prize. Despite her light tone, nobody was too happy. Japan had received plenty of pressure from the international community to allow outside law enforcement, military and heroes to flood the country, but the Prime Minister had stubbornly convinced the majority of the government to refuse any foreign influence. It hadn't taken much digging to find out that All Might had been the one to talk the Prime Minister around to that line of thought. The man was actually one of All Might's biggest fans. However, he had taken the advice to an extreme, and Japan's isolationism was getting on the rest of the world's nerves. Looks like we'll have to do this the hard way, Stripes sighed. Clandestine operations it is. Can Nezu help us out? Melissa laughed over the radio. I'm pretty sure he's been itching for a chance to help us directly. Stripes nodded decisively. Okay, we'll go back to Island for a couple of days, get what we need, and then head to Japan. Deku, any suggestions? There was a long pause, and then Upgrade's head popped out of the controls. I remember some of the security measures Yua had before I left. Between what Melissa sent over and whatever Mei and Nezu-sensei have come up with, it's probably the safest place in Japan and the best place to start our next mission. Everyone accepted Deku's words, but none of them missed the flat way he said them. Over the last year, they knew he spoke like that when he was beyond stressed. They understood why. After all, they were talking about returning to his home, a place with the people he loved, but also millions of others who wanted him arrested on the word of someone he used to respect. As soon as the plane landed on Island, Midoriya staggered out. He nearly collapsed, but Melissa had seen this coming and had been waiting to catch him. I'm fine, he muttered, and forced himself to stand unaided. I'll be in my room for a while. You're going to try again? Melissa asked. You were a mess last time. I almost got it working last time, Midoriya stubbornly argued, but then sighed. But if you could send some food, I'd appreciate it. I'll also send more supplements. Melissa peered into his eyes and winced. I looked at your charts. Your dosage needs to be upped again. Midoriya nodded and tried to walk, but his unsteady feet betrayed him, and Stripes caught him before he fell again. Wheelchair, she said, her tone daring Midoriya to defy her. Fine, Midoriya bit out, and allowed Melissa to unfold a wheelchair for him. I'll take him to his room, Stripes said to Melissa. You get the meds, Chang will get the food. Monkey King nodded, even though he scowled at Stripes' use of his first name, since they were all still technically on the job. Sure, Kathleen. After Stripes took Midoriya away, Melissa turned to the other heroes. He's getting worse, isn't he? You'll notice he didn't fight the wheelchair this time, Ranger said, and rubbed his eyes. I can barely look at the kid now. His whole body is falling apart. Melissa almost said that the same was true for all of them, but that wasn't really the case. True, she was exhausted from designing and building her inventions, not to mention running more and more shield assets, and the heroes were running themselves ragged chasing down every lead they could think of. But they could all sleep at night without the aid of painkillers. Midoriya, on the other hand, was getting worse by the day, and he spent as much time as he could as an alien, since that was the only way he could do anything without coughing up blood. And my only problem is losing a few pounds from stress, Melissa thought bitterly. Izuku has to worry about dying if he goes for a jog. Her friend's condition reminded her of how All Might used to be, and immediately soured her already foul mood. Every time she thought about that man, she imagined using one of her many projects to punch him in the face, if only because Midoriya was too focused with saving the world to think about that. She yelped when Panzer abruptly poked her forehead. You're thinking dark thought, Freyalin. If Izuku sees you like that, he'll be worried, and that will only worsen his health. Melissa glared at him. That's not fair. Panzer laughed. But it's the only thing that will work on you. You're very protective of him. I have to be. Everyone who would normally be helping him is stuck in Japan. You know we can help with that, Maccabee said kindly. Besides, if things go the way I think, he'll see those friends of his very soon. Several hours later, Melissa went to see Midoriya. She knocked on his door, and winced at the pained grunts she heard before it opened. Midoriya looked awful. He'd lost a lot of weight over the last year, and on a bad day, he couldn't even stand. His scars stood out even more against his pale skin, which was drenched in sweat. Any progress? She asked, and handed him a bottle of water. Midoriya downed the entire bottle in seconds. No more than usual. That bad, huh? Melissa pushed him back into his room and made him sit on his bed. It broke her heart to see how easy it was. Do we have any good news? Midoriya asked, and lay on his back. Actually, yeah. Melissa gave him her best smile. Nezu got in touch with Stripes. He said he's already made all the preparations for us. We can be ready to leave tomorrow evening. Midoriya closed his eyes, but Melissa knew his mind was racing. If I use upgrade to increase our speed, I can get us there in 3 hours. Melissa had already run the numbers. 45-minute bursts, so you don't push the OMNITRIX too hard. Midoriya relaxed. Yeah, that works. Melissa sat on the edge of his bed. You excited about going home? Maybe, if I didn't have to hunt down the most powerful person to ever exist on this earth, and if half the country didn't want me arrested or dead. Midoriya cracked open one eye to stare at her. Other than that, yeah, I'm very excited. Sorry I asked, Melissa muttered. No, I'm sorry. Midoriya tried to sit up, only to wince, and Melissa pushed him back down. That wasn't fair to you. You're sick, so you get a pass. Melissa wagged a finger at him mock sternly. But if you talk like that to a lady again, I'm telling your mom. Midoriya managed a grin. I'm pretty sure most ladies aren't covered in grease and electrical burns every day. You're a grease monkey. Okay, now I'm definitely telling your mom. Midoriya laughed. It was weak, but it was genuine, and Melissa treasured it for its rarity these days. After he finally fell asleep, she got up to leave him be. As she went to her own room to get some rest, she couldn't help but worry that her friends in Japan might be in even worse shape than Midoriya. 21 days until the end. Hanta, wake up. Zero yawned, but didn't open his eyes. It's our day off, Tsu, I don't wanna. Asui sighed and shook him again. I got a text from Momo. She said there's something going on, and we're part of it. Can I have 5 more minutes? In response, he felt something long and slimy go into his ear. He yelped and threw himself out of bed. He glared at his girlfriend, still perched on the bed, whose tongue slipped back into her mouth. You know, I think that kind of thing is supposed to be sexy, he said. To anyone else, Asui's expression was its usual blankness, but Zero knew she was smug. I didn't hear you complaining last night, Ribbit. Zero's eye twitched, but he got to his feet. Fine, you win. Costume or school uniform? Costume, Momo said it was hero-related. Like all the students in the hero course, regardless of year, Shiro and Asui had started sharing a room for several reasons. First, nobody wanted to risk sleeping through an alarm these days, so having a roommate to wake them up was practical. Someone, Shiro didn't remember who anymore, had joked that Aizawa would have either been proud or annoyed by the rationality. Class 2A had had a good cry and laugh about that afterwards. Another reason was that nobody wanted to be alone with their thoughts these days, especially after Jaku. Hound Dog tried to counsel the students when he could, but he was also a full-time hero, and his talents were needed in the field more than ever. Nezu had hired additional counselors, but they were still overworked. While not every pair of roommates were couples, those who were rarely had time to really enjoy the time alone. Even those students with just provisional licenses had to be ready for action at any time, and all of them had the bruises to show for it. Nezu had promised the extra experience would help them have their own agencies immediately after graduating, assuming they all lived long enough to reach that point. So, did Momo say who was getting called in for this one? Shiro asked as he got into the shower. Everyone in our class, Asui said, in between brushing her teeth. She didn't say who the pro in charge was. 20 of us, plus any pros they give us. Shiro shook his head. This really could be big. It should have been only 19, but a few weeks after Midoriya had left, Nezu had brought Shinso Hitoshi in to fill his spot. No one in the class was particularly ready to replace their friend, but Shinso had made it clear that he wasn't there to replace Midoriya. He was just keeping his seat warm, so to speak. That had earned him points, and he'd proven himself in a dozen high-risk missions over the last few months. After getting ready, Shiro and Asui left their room. Like almost everyone in their class, they had grown over the last year, and their costumes had been changed to account for that. Cellophane was taller and had put on more muscle, though he was still on the slender side. His costume had thin, flexible armor on his chest and calves that didn't inhibit his movement. Froppy was now the shortest girl in class, something Gyro was still happy about, not helped by her posture. Since her hair was short, she could fit it under a green helmet that enclosed her entire head, except for her mouth. Her gloves were also more form-fitting, and her entire costume had been modified to allow her poison to seep through without having to roll up a sleeve. "Hey, guys!" Alien Queen waved them over for a quick breakfast. "Sleep well?" Froppy didn't have her helmet on, so everyone could see her waggle her eyebrows. "You could say that." Cellophane lunged at her, but she hopped away, while most of the other students laughed. It was no secret that those who were in a relationship were doing more than kissing, and after over a year of living under the same roof, it wasn't like any of them were prudes. Alien Queen in particular had gone from teasing everyone to doing everything in her power to encourage the romance. With everything going on, she wanted her friends to have as much joy in their lives as they could get. Despite her attitude, her costume reflected a more serious side to her. She wore a solid green sleeveless bodysuit, with white boots and a white belt that hung at an angle. Everything was acid-proof, which was especially good, since the belt was loaded with containers that held everything from spare communicators to first aid equipment. Triumph only rolled his eyes and returned his attention to his food. His hair had grown out over the last year, tied back in a ponytail that reached the base of his neck. It made an interesting swirl of red and white, which his girlfriend loved to play with any chance she got. His costume wasn't that much different on the outside, but he now wore a nanotech bodysuit underneath his outer costume that helped vent heat on his left side and warmed up his right. Alien Queen saw his reaction and reached over to smack him upside the head, only for Virtus to stop her. "You're no fun." "I am simply balancing you out," Virtus replied. His costume was slimmer than it used to be, barely covering the iron-hard muscles he'd developed. Every inch of him was covered in that armor, with no bodysuit exposed, though it was carefully articulated to prevent any restriction of movement. He also had a backpack that could link up with his engines, which could direct his thrust and allow for brief flight. Genesis smiled at the banter. She had grown taller and even more beautiful over the year, but there was no hiding the bags under her eyes from exhaustion. With the teachers often on missions, she had taken over almost all of the paperwork for the class, and had been determined to keep up with her studies at the same time. The only reason she hadn't collapsed by now was due to the efforts of Virtus. They were roommates, but nobody was sure if they were actually a couple, and both of them had become exceptionally good at avoiding any questions about it. Her costume hadn't changed much, simply because it was already fine the way it was. She had gone with a red disc over her left ear for a few weeks that had doubled as a communicator and a cover after a villain had mangled that ear during a battle. But Eri had reversed the damage later. Even though she had been doing well for months, everyone felt a tiny bit of relief when Uravity laughed along with them. Every minute of her day not in the field, sleeping, or taking care of Eri was spent training, and it showed. She was easily one of the best hand-to-hand fighters in the class, keeping up with the likes of Bakugou and Kirishima, and only regularly beaten by Ojiro. Her costume still had the same wings and helmet, but she wore new armor, modeled after Virtus, that covered her entire body. Most of the armor was black, save for thick pink stripes going up her arms, legs, helmet, and the center of her chest. Her boots were even sleeker, almost form-fitting, though they added almost 2 inches to her height, thanks to the miniature thrusters Hatsune had added. Even without that, she had gone through quite a growth spurt, and Genesis was the only girl in their class that was taller than her. At first, some people had worried that her prosthetic arm wouldn't fit her anymore, but Brainiac had clearly anticipated that when he'd built it, because it lengthened and expanded to match her flesh and blood arm perfectly. Some thought it was eerie, but Uraraka was just glad that she could still operate at her best. Everyone else in the class had made alterations to their costumes, from Tsukuyomi's black carbon fiber armor under his cloak, to Ground Zero's multi-barreled grenade launcher gauntlets. After Jaku, heroes of all levels had been gearing up for nothing less than war with the League of Villains. However, no war had happened not like the battles in Gunga and Jaku, at least. True, roaming gangs of villains had popped up with alarming frequency, but the ferocity with which both heroes and police cracked down on them kept any of the criminals from setting up a power base. Some of those fights weren't without cost, especially when the heroes had to deal with Tartarus escapees. Over 200 police officers had died in those battles, as had 30 heroes. The worst part was that some of those former prisoners had broken the unwritten agreement between heroes and villains and gone after family members. Fat Gum had nearly been arrested after he killed a villain that had murdered his uncle, and Rukyu had torn an entire gang of escapees apart after they had beaten a cousin of hers to death. After those incidents, and dozens of others, the hero community had pushed back against Japan's isolationist decrees, demanding that their families be evacuated if the government wanted them to keep doing their jobs. The government was still deadlocked over the decision, so Nezu had stepped up and turned Yua into a shelter for anyone related to a hero. The school was crowded, but it was safe, and that was all that mattered to the heroes, who could now focus on saving the country from descending into anarchy. However, something had to give, and in the end, it was Nezu who decided to roll the dice first. "Thank you all for coming," Nezu said as the heroes took their seats. "I understand that some of you were supposed to take the day off. Heaven knows we all could use a break. But an opportunity has arisen that we may not get again." Despite everything, the heroes were intrigued. Nezu didn't say things like that if he didn't mean it. "Our intelligence-gathering efforts have yielded results," Nezu went on. "We've been aware that League informants have been keeping tabs on police and hero activities for some time, but we were waiting for the right opportunity to use those resources against them. That time has come. We've leaked to those informants that a convoy will be departing from one secure location to another, carrying Dr. Garaki. He will be the perfect bait to lure the League into the open, where we will strike." The heroes in the room murmured amongst themselves. Capturing Garaki was the only silver lining from the battle at Jaku. If he had remained with the League, Japan would have been overrun with Nomu soldiers. Not to mention any other horrors Garaki would have come up with. His location was a secret, and anyone who worked in the same place that so much as mentioned it was severely punished. "Nezu-sensei," Genesis said, "we aren't actually bringing Garaki into the open, are we?" "We would never risk it," Nezu assured her. "We'll have plenty of decoy methods in place to make it look like Garaki is being moved. While it is unlikely that Shigaraki himself will conduct the rescue attempt, I believe that at least several of his top lieutenants will lead the attack. Your objective is to defeat as many of them as you can. Doing so will hinder the League's operations across the country." Uravity rubbed her right arm as she considered this. She had a score to settle with Slice, and part of her hoped that the woman who had taken her arm would show up. I won't let that interfere with the mission, she thought fiercely. I refuse to let my own issues get in the way. One more thing, Nezu added. We have reason to believe that other nations are preparing for a forced intervention. If heroes from other countries arrive, I would like you all to cooperate, regardless of what the government says. Nobody was really complaining. After a year of losing lives and chasing down bad leads, the only people who still cared about national pride were those who weren't on the front lines. For some of the people in the room, the idea of heroes from out of the country showing up made them wonder if one missing friend might come back as well. Snipe was the overall field commander for the mission. Nezu's ability to track their progress was limited to street cameras. The constant cloud layer over Japan meant satellites were useless. Other than Class 2A, there were a few pro heroes. Alien Queen recognized a few by sight, but only one by name. She hadn't seen Sky Dancer in months, and she barely looked better now than she did then. She had deep bags under her eyes, and she had lost that extra bit of energy. As she got closer to her former mentor, Alien Queen swore she could smell alcohol on the older woman's breath. Sky Dancer wasn't the first hero to fall apart after Jaku, and she wouldn't be the last. The only reason she hadn't been fired was because they needed every hero they could scrounge up. More than a few retired heroes had been pulled back into active service to help offset the numbers lost. Sky Dancer, Alien Queen greeted neutrally. Huh? The older hero blinked at her a few times. Oh, Alien Queen, it's been a while. What's a first-year student doing on a mission like this? I'm almost done with my second year, Alien Queen pointed out. Really? Sorry, I totally forgot. I've, been really busy. Alien Queen didn't buy that for a second, but now was not the time to be starting drama. So, how's your wife? We got divorced 2 months ago. So much for not starting drama. Alien Queen opened her mouth to apologize, but Sky Dancer kept talking. She's quirkless, and when we learned about where quirks came from, she said I wasn't even human. She left me, and the paperwork went through a few months later. Oh, I'm sorry. Sky Dancer sighed. I mean, she wasn't exactly wrong. If we've got a quirk, we're not totally human, are we? Alien Queen didn't have an answer for that, simply because she didn't care. She could look herself in the mirror and like what she saw. What her DNA said really didn't matter to her. None of that would help Sky Dancer, and they didn't have time for therapy anyway. All right, people, listen up. Snipe got their attention with his thick southern accent, and pointed to the armored cars in the garage. We're gonna escort these here transports to the drop-off point. If we get attacked, and Nezu is positive we will, our job is to keep the villains from getting away. Any catch is a good catch, but we're hoppin' that some of the top members of the league show up for us to nab. Don't worry if the cars get attacked. They're all remote operated. Oh, and our route takes us through an evacuated zone. So don't worry about collateral damage, either. Good luck, and stay safe. By the time Alien Queen turned back to Sky Dancer, the older woman had moved to another side of the garage. Even from a distance, Alien Queen could see the apathy in her eyes. She was going through the motions, with none of the enthusiasm she'd had a year ago. You okay? Triumph asked her quietly. Alien Queen sighed. No, but let's get this over with anyway. The trip was quiet for the first hour. All anyone could see was damaged buildings and partially flooded streets. The rain wasn't too bad today, with just a heavy drizzle. Nobody doubted that it would get worse soon enough. Light rain never lasted for long, and lately, it was a rare day that it wasn't pouring. Of everyone in Class 2A, only Froppy was enjoying herself. The rest would have to deal with cold, wet clothes when they got back to Ua. Chargebolt was particularly miserable, since using his quirk in the rain ran the risk of shorting himself out, so he had to stay by Triumph. If it came to a fight, Triumph would create an umbrella of ice, and then quickly dry him off with the fire half of his quirk. Tentacle broke the tense silence when one of his duplicated eyes spotted something. Incoming. If the villains that attacked thought they would take the heroes by surprise, they were mistaken. They had been expecting an attack the entire time, and they enacted their plan with clockwork precision. In seconds, the rain cut out as Triumph created a massive dome of ice. It was cold, but it wasn't nearly as wet. The ice umbrella trick wasn't just for Chargebolt. More than a few members of the class fought better in dry conditions, so Triumph would take any opportunity to create a much bigger dome of ice to fight under. Virtus made the first move. With a quick burst from his engines, he was inside a villain's reach and drove his knee into his stomach. Virtus was already moving before his first target hit the ground and vomited. Ground Zero was a second behind him, rampaging through a dozen villains with plenty of explosions. "We're under attack," Snipe reported into his radio. "I count 40 no, 58 villains. No sign of priority targets yet, but support is needed." "Understood," Nezu replied tersely. "Reinforcements are on their way." "Tell 'em to double time it. I don't want these chumps getting away." Uravity easily weaved out of the way of a villain's attack. He wasn't anything special, though his quirk, which let him launch his fists like rockets, was a little annoying. She could have taken him down herself without much issue. She could see a weakness in his stance that would let her knock him over with one good hit, but she served better as a distraction and a lookout. Besides, Froppy took him down before she seriously considered handling it. She waved at her friend and then noticed something very large headed right towards her class. "Scatter," she shouted. Manic laughter from the incoming villain made her skin crawl, but it wasn't until she spotted the exposed muscle fibers that Uravity recognized Muscular, and she briefly saw red. Midoriya had told her about the fight that had ended in Holoben's death, and how Muscular was a part of that. The Rising Stars hadn't known the AI long, but they still considered him part of the team, and this was one of the men who had killed him. Somehow, without actually saying anything, the Rising Stars moved as one to take on Muscular. Ground Zero started to go in the same direction, but he saw something in their eyes that made him rethink that. "You guys take that fucker down," he snapped, and turned to the rest of the class. "Come on, we've got the rest of these scrubs." Muscular rose to his full height and sneered at the Rising Stars. "Hey, I know you guys. You were in that class we attacked. I never got a chance to kill any of you before, and I can't wait to fix that." "Try it, freak," Cellophane growled, and shot streams of tape around Muscular's leg. He tried to pull that leg out from under him, but Muscular was too heavy to budge. Uravity tried to change that by firing her metal hand at Muscular, but the villain leaned out of the way and grabbed the cable. He heaved and slammed her into Cellophane, sending them both sprawling. "Oh," Cellophane groaned, then rolled to his feet and helped up Uravity. "You okay?" "I'll be fine," she said, and reeled her hand back in. "Let's just get this guy." Muscular wasn't exactly a smart fighter, but he had good instincts. He blocked kicks from both Froppy and Virtus, leaned out of the way of the shells Genesis fired from a small cannon, and blocked both Triumph's ice and fire. What he didn't count on was getting his arm doused in acid, and he roared in pain as it ate away at his muscle fibers. "Not so fun now, is it?" Alien Queen taunted. Rather than answer, Muscular smashed the ground in front of him and hurled a chunk of debris at her. With an almost lazy wave of her arm, Alien Queen created a wall of acid that melted the rock before it hit her. Cellophane used the distraction to grab Muscular's leg with even more tape. This time, though, he handed the other end to Virtus. Much stronger than his friend, Virtus' engines revved, and with a burst of speed, Muscular was dragged off to the side. A year ago, Cellophane's tape would have snapped under the strain, but after so much training between missions, what looked like tape was nearly as strong as steel cable. Virtus used its strength to wrap up Muscular. It would only last for a few seconds, but that was long enough for the students to get their second wind. Genesis created a knife that fit perfectly in one hand and a small bomb in the other. She attached the bomb to the knife's handle, spun the blade around, and hurled it into Muscular's shoulder with expert precision. It was a technique she had been practicing for months, meant for the occasional Nomu, or one of the League's heavy hitters. It wasn't the most humane weapon, but nobody had called her out on it, and there were many other heroes who had been let off the leash in far worse ways this year. 2 seconds after the knife hit Muscular, the bomb exploded, tearing off a chunk of flesh. Muscular roared again, but there was just as much pain as there was anger in his voice. He staggered back and flailed wildly. A lucky swing caught Uravity as she swooped down to tag him, and she was sent hurtling through a broken window. The other Rising Stars were now even angrier, but before they could go in for another round, something blew past them at incredible speeds. There was a flash of green light, and then Cannonbolt slammed into Muscular with enough force to make the entire street shake. It took the students a moment to really register what they had just seen. Anger melted away into shock, disbelief, and then joy. He was back. Deku was back. Muscular looked just as happy to see Deku, though for all the wrong reasons. He forced himself to his feet and laughed madly. Well, if it ain't Midoriya, I was hoping you'd show up, oof. Deku didn't speak. He just turned into human Gaosaur and clocked Muscular across the jaw. Then, before the man hit the ground, there was another green flash, and ultimate human Gaosaur picked Muscular up by the face and slammed him into the street. Don't. Another slam. Ever. Another. Touch them. By the time ultimate human Gaosaur was done, Muscular was a broken mess on the ground. His muscle fibers were shredded, and his bones were shattered. If it had been anyone else, they would be dead. As it was, Muscular would need to spend months in a hospital. For a moment, everyone was still. The rising stars couldn't even hear fighting in the distance, focused as they were on their returned friend. Then Uraraka groaned as she got to her feet. Her helmet had broken in her crash, and her wings had snapped off. But when she saw Deku, she stopped caring. Izuku, she called out, her voice barely audible. There were 2 flashes of green light, and then Midoriya stood there, staring at them. He was thinner than they remembered, and paler, but it was still him. Hi. Someone let out a sob, and everyone took a step towards Midoriya. He smiled at them, and then choked as blood spurted from his mouth. The other students were horrified, but before they could start to run, a red and blue blur rushed past them. For a second, they worried that All Might had arrived to attack Midoriya at his weakest. But to their shock, it was Stars and Stripes who caught him before he collapsed. Idiot, the American hero snapped. You've been an alien for almost 40 minutes, and you decided to go ultimate. You get messed up by that on a full charge. What did you think would happen? Sorry, Midoriya mumbled, and then went limp in her arms. Stripes sighed and placed her hand on his chest. Izukumidoriya will replenish all the blood he just lost. It could have been everyone's imagination, but Midoriya looked just a little healthier. Stripes rolled her eyes and then looked up at the students. You guys must be his friends. Probably not the reunion you were hoping for, right? You can say that again, Cellophane said faintly. Sorry about this, but we should get moving. Stripes gestured to Deku with her chin. Poor guy needs some rest, and about 1,000 different meds to keep him going right now. She noticed the horrified looks on their faces and sighed again. I could have phrased that better, huh? Yes, you could have, Genesis said in a strangled voice. Stripes looked over her shoulder. Well, at least the rest of the fight's over. Guys, we need to get a move on. Uraraka had to sit down for a moment. Whether it was the concussion, seeing her boyfriend again, or suddenly seeing 7 of the greatest heroes on the planet appear all at once, there was just too much going on. A hand rested on her shoulder. She looked up, and was shocked to see Melissa smiling down at her. Yeah, it's been one of those days. Despite the speed they'd moved, word spread even faster through Yua that Midoriya had returned. A small crowd of people tried to force their way into the infirmary to see him, but whether they loved him or hated him, everyone thought twice about visiting after Geosync carried them away with her quirk. The list of people who were allowed to visit was very small. At the top of that list were his parents, who were escorted in by several heroes that were part of the school's security. They were for the Midoriya family's protection. More than a few people taking refuge at the school blamed Izuku for everything, and since he was gone, they had tried to take it out on his parents. How is he? Inko demanded, not taking her eyes off her son. He looks terrible. Melissa rubbed her eyes, then put her glasses back on before answering. Not great. He's only not in pain when he goes alien, and he can't stay that way forever. We give him sedatives at night to help him sleep through the pain. Inko couldn't hold back her tears as she stroked Izuku's hair. Oh, my poor baby. I wish I could do something, Stripes admitted from the other side of the room. I tried using my quirk on him, but whatever is happening is overpowering New World Order. The best I can do is replenish his blood, but it only lasts a while before he coughs it up again. I have half the scientists on Island working on anything that might help him, but they've only managed to slow down the degradation, Melissa added. Hisashi bowed to both of them. Thank you for trying. That's more than a lot of people in this country are willing to do. I heard it was getting better. Stripes looked back at the door and remembered the not insignificant crowd who wanted Izuku dead. Well, kind of. There aren't any mobs, but I think that's partly because of the rain, Hisashi said, and then chuckled dryly. Though Yaoyorozu-san's family has done much to help him on the legal side of things. Melissa grinned. It does help to be friends with someone who has more money than some countries. You're not one to talk, Miss. I own an island, Stripes said with a laugh. It's Miss. I own most of an island, thank you very much. Melissa paused when she felt her phone vibrate. She looked at her texts, and her good mood evaporated. Stripes, we've got a situation outside. Stripes frowned, which deepened when Melissa traced an outline of two very distinct tufts of hair. Oh, great. I was hoping to deal with that later today. I'll grab the others, you go see your friends. No offense to them, but I haven't kissed my boyfriend in almost a year, so I'd like to see him first. That brought the smile back to Stripes' face, and she laughed as she left the room. Despite what she'd said, Melissa actually sought out the rising stars first. It wasn't hard to find them. They were right down the hall, waiting for Recovery Girl to let them visit Izuku. They had changed out of their costumes, but they still looked scuffed up and sweaty. How is he? Yaoyorozu demanded. Sleeping, which is how he needs to stay for a few more hours. Melissa raised an eyebrow at them. I'm fine, by the way, great to see you guys again. The 7 younger students immediately grabbed her in a group hug. Sorry about that, Ashido apologized sincerely. It's just, the last time we saw Midori. Melissa sighed. Yeah, he looks even worse, but he won't stop fighting. At least he's home, Ribbit, Asui said. We can stop trying to find clips of him on the internet. Melissa made a face. You haven't been watching those conspiracy videos, have you? I kind of like the one about him being a government super spy, Asui admitted unrepentantly. Okay, that one wasn't bad. Melissa scowled. I'm still mad about the things All Might said. Do people still believe him? Depending on the last time All Might makes a speech, about 40% of the population, Ida said. His expression was calm, but his clenched fists were all anyone needed to know how mad he was. Yaoyorozu grabbed him by the ear. Enough of that. We have enough stress without bringing him up. Ida sighed. You are right, of course. As I always am, Yaoyorozu said with a smile that showed she was kidding. Now, since we cannot do anything but wait until Izuku wakes up, how about we go to the dorm, and I'll make us all some tea? Melissa grinned. Yes, please, even I can't get a hold of the kind of tea you get, Momo. Most of the rising stars were pulling Melissa away, but Zero noticed that one of them wasn't moving. Ochako, you coming? Uraraka shook her head. I'm going to stay here. I know there's nothing we can do for Izuku right now, but I want to let him know I'm here. She's still a hopeless romantic, Ashido explained with a teasing grin. She's been going over what she wanted to say to him at least once a day since you guys left. You're going into space when I get back, Uraraka growled, but didn't take her eyes off the door to the infirmary. Zero laughed. Come on, Melissa. I bet we can get you caught up on everything you missed before Mirio shows up. After that, I don't think we'll see you for a while. Melissa grinned, though she couldn't hide her blush. Nezu smiled as the various heroes took a seat in his office. It's so good to see you all again, and even better that it's in person. Always a pleasure, Nezu, even in these trying times. Jack picked up the tea Nezu had set out for them. Ah, a wonderful blend. You and your weird tea fixation, Maccabee said with fond exasperation. When you get a chance, there is a student here you should meet, Jack. Nezu raised his own cup. She might give you a run for your money when it comes to good tea. Oh, God, he's multiplying, Ranger joked. Stripes fixed them with a look, and even Jack looked a little sheepish. As much as I'd like to have a casual chat with you, Nezu, you sent us that alert, and I'm worried. Is All Might really going to come for Izuku? Nezu sighed. Word will have reached him by now. I wanted to keep Midoriya-san's return a secret, but All Might has enough supporters among the refugees in Yua that someone would have told him. I imagine that he is on his way right now to arrest him. Can he do that? Monkey King asked. Legally, I mean. Technically, the warrant for his arrest is still valid if you tilt your head and squint a little, which is exactly how All Might will justify his actions. Nezu sipped his tea. As far as All Might is concerned, Midoriya-san is a clear and present danger, and only his adherence to the principles of heroism has prevented him from taking the law into his own hands. That is why I must ask what you all plan to do if and when this comes to a head. The other heroes were quiet for a long moment as they considered that. Ranger broke the silence first. The kid only wants to do what's right. He practically killed himself trying everything he could to find a way to stop Shigaraki. Someone like that is no villain, let me tell you. He's right, Geosync said. We have all gotten to know him this year. He is our friend, and we have made it clear to our governments that he does not deserve the scorn he has received. You haven't answered my question, Nezu commented. What will you do if All Might forces this issue? All eyes turned to Stars and Stripes. If anyone would choose to stand with All Might, it would be his biggest American fan. Shigaraki is the real danger here, Stripes said evenly. Him, All for One, and the rest of the League of Villains. We need every advantage we can get to beat them. And if I'm being honest, Izuku has a better shot than All Might. If beating the League means burning certain bridges, then I'll light the match. Nezu smiled. I'm glad to hear that, because I predict that he will be here in 20 minutes. Jack sighed. Enough time to finish this tea, then. He's back. Chisaki sat up with as much dignity as he could, considering he didn't have arms. Midoriya? Chrono bowed his head. Yes, it was a rumor at first, but it's been confirmed through social media. Rappa laughed. It's about time he came back. I never had a chance to fight him last time, and I want to see if I can take him. He's not alone, Chrono warned. He has 7 of the strongest heroes in the world with him. If they think we're working with the League, or if we even get in the way, they'll come down on us even harder than the local heroes. Even Rappa paused. He was strong, but he didn't give himself good odds of beating the likes of Stars and Stripes, Geosync, or Gentleman Jack. It doesn't matter, Chisaki said tiredly. Midoriya is the one who broke us. There's no coming back for the 8 precepts. All we have left is revenge. The second we have a shot, we'll take it. You'll do no such thing, a new voice hissed from the shadows. A true hero can't be distracted by scum like you, especially when true evil exists. Sakaki was the first to die, a knife buried in his skull. Before the other Yakuza could make a move, several blurs passed through the group, leaving them all with severed tendons and gashes that bled sluggishly. Some, like Rappa, tried to rise, but Stain ingested their blood with a quick lick across his sword, and they stayed down. Only Chisaki without his arms, and thus powerless, was untouched. He stared blankly up at the 2 men who had just ruined his last chance at revenge. Feathers lazily orbited around Hawks, and Stain rested his bloody sword across one shoulder. What do you want to do with this one? Stain asked. He's not exactly a threat. He was able to maintain the loyalty of hardened criminals, even after losing his quirk, Hawks said. Besides, there's a kill-on-sight order for the 8 precepts. They're too dangerous to let live. Quite a bloodthirsty thing to say, and that's coming from me. Hawks shrugged nonchalantly, but there was a flicker of rage in his eyes when he looked at Chisaki. This piece of garbage tortured an innocent child for years, all to destroy the very thing that gave him power. He killed her over and over, then brought her back to life so that he could harvest her. It was to cleanse the world of its disease, Chisaki said, and tried to rise to his feet. You understand, Stain, you want the same thing. Stain glared at him. I want the world purged of false heroes. The last year has proved which ones are just here for money and fame. Those who remain are determined to save the world. I'm here to clean up the scum that would get in their way. Before Chisaki could speak again, his throat was cut, and he bled out in seconds. The rest of the 8 precepts grieved for only a moment before joining him in death. So, Midoriya really is back? Stain asked, casually stepping over the puddles of blood. Yeah, he is. Hawk sighed. Let's see if I can apologize before he kills me. All Might stepped out of his car and stood in front of UA's gates. Between him and his goal was someone who had been his friend just a year earlier. Get out of the way, Nightai, All Might ordered. You can't stop me from getting inside. I have no intention of stopping you, Sir Nightai said. I'm here to watch you try to do the wrong thing. Hopefully, it will be the last time, and then you'll see sense. Unlike his former boss, Sir Nightai carried an umbrella. All Might didn't fail to notice that it was a very specific shade of green. It told him all he needed to know about where his former sidekick's loyalties still lay. All Might loomed over Nightai. Where is Midoriya? So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for more such crossovers. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author the incredible Muffin on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.